All right, so today I want to show you some of the best ball python hets that you can invest in for the biggest return on investment. And some of these projects are really high end, and there's ways you can get into them for relatively little money. It's pretty amazing, but a lot of times you have to take a risk when you get into hets. So for example, het is one copy of a recessive gene. So if you have one copy of the gene, you can't see it in a ball python. You could have several hets in a snake, and you wouldn't even know it until you breed it out and end up with two copies of that gene. So sometimes it's a gamble. Sometimes you're gambling on the percentage of hets too. So for example, if you take an albino, you breed it to something else, all the offspring have one copy of the albino gene, although you can't see it. Those are all 100% het because we know 100% of the time it has one copy of the gene from the pairing. But if you took one of those hets, you breed it to something else, all the offspring have a 50% chance of having one copy of that recessive gene. So there's a 50% chance it's het, 50% chance it's a normal. So in a lot of cases, you can roll the dice and gamble on some of these really high-end projects. And sometimes you can buy multiple snakes at a relatively low price and get into, potentially some really big returns on investment. So today I'm going to jump over the internet and I want to show you some of these hets that I think are the best investments. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with some of the rarest, most expensive recessive ball python morphs and kind of work my way down to some of the more reasonable ones so you can pretty much jump in at any price point. And I want to start with the sunset ball python. This is what a sunset looks like, and as a matter of fact, when I started in ball pythons about 5 years ago, a lot of people were posting het sunsets over here on Morphmarket. And I was like, what in the world is a sunset? It wasn't until a couple years later when someone finally posted a visual that I could actually see what a sunset looks like. And it's a really visually dominant mutation. So a lot of times when you work other genes into the sunset, it can have a really dramatic, kind of an overpowering effect with a lot of genes. So you can make some really impressive sunset combos. Some of them are really super bright. And if you're thinking about getting into sunsets, this is what it's going to cost you. I came over here and looked for the cheapest one that was born last year in 2019. That was a female, and this one is $5,000. Pretty crazy. And a lot of people, it really depends on kind of where you are in the popularity of the morph. Sometimes the males are more expensive, sometimes the males are less expensive, and it really depends. Kind of, I'd say in a lot of cases the males are like half price and sometimes even less than half, depending on kind of what you're looking for. It really depends if if there's a lot of hets out there and people want to produce the visuals. Like in this case, a lot of people, there's lots of hets out there that are reasonably priced that are pretty much all males, and a lot of the female hets are really in kind of a short supply when it comes to the hets. So if you took a ball python like this, the sunset, and you bred it to something else, this is what you would produce. You would produce a het sunset. Looks completely normal, like a normal ball python, but it has one copy of the sunset gene. And if you're thinking about getting a female het sunset, this is what it's going to cost you. This one sold for $1,000. Pretty crazy for a female het sunset. And you can actually get into this a little bit less expensive. You can pick up like a 66% het or a possible het. And essentially what that is, if you take two hets and you breed them together, you get like a 25% chance of producing a visual, and all the non-visuals are 66% het. There's a 66% chance that it is het for sunset. So you can actually pick up, take a look at this, you can pick up a 66% het sunset. Looks completely normal. You're gambling on this one. It could be, there's like a 34% chance that this one is a normal ball python, but you're still going to pay for the chance that it's het sunset. This one is $200. Not too bad for a female 66% het sunset. So essentially what you could do is you could maybe even make a deal and maybe pick up like 3 or 4 of these 66% het sunsets, and then maybe further on down the road, once these kind of grow up and mature, you could buy a male that is 100% het, breed it to all these females, and I can guarantee, if you buy multiple females, I can almost guarantee you're going to hit some visual sunsets. Then you can take those visuals, breed them back to the ones that you've proven that are 100% het sunset. So it gets a little bit confusing. So if you take a 66% het Het Sunset and you breed something to it and you prove it out, and you know for sure that it carries one copy of the Sunset gene, essentially what it does is it transforms from a 66% het to 100% het. So you don't know what it is right now, but if you bred it, you could prove it out, then it kind of transforms into a 66% Het Sunset. And you can also kind of further dilute it. So as a matter of fact, you could take, if you had a male or something like this, and you bred this one to another normal and you produced a whole bunch of hatchlings, they would be possible Het Sunsets, because this one is possible. It's, you know, it's a 66% chance, but you don't know it. And if you don't prove it out, then everything you breed it to, if it's a male or even if it's a female, then it's possible Het Sunset until this one is proven out. And if you prove it to be 100%, then all the offspring become 50%. It gets kind of confusing. The percentage is just kind of the odds of having one copy of the gene. If you can prove that it has one copy of the gene, then it becomes 100%. You either know it or you don't know it. It becomes 100% or it becomes 0%, and you're stuck with a $200 normal ball python. That is the risk of kind of jumping into some of these projects. So here's another really awesome project, the Monsoon. The Monsoon's fairly new. There's not a whole lot of Monsoons out there and not a lot of Hets. I've seen the prices kind of jump around like crazy all over the place, and this is a really visually dominant morph too. Really masks a lot of the other genes. Kind of a really interesting, there's no other gene in ball pythons that really looks like this. This is really crazy. I've seen some combos, multi-gene combos that look pretty close, but as a standalone gene, as a recessive gene, this is crazy. And let me tell you, if you want to get into Monsoons, this is probably the highest end. This one is actually for sale, born last year, for $12,500. Pretty crazy for this Monsoon project. So you're probably thinking, hey, I want to get into the Monsoon, but I don't have $12,000. I want to jump in and buy a Het. So this is what it's going to cost you for a Het. This one is a Het Monsoon. So if you take a Monsoon, you breed it to something else, you know 100% of the time it has one copy of the Monsoon gene. So this is 100% Het, and this is a female, and this is what it's going to cost you just for a Het is $4,000. So you know where I'm going on this. You could actually gamble on the possible Hets. Here's one over here. This one is a 50% Het Monsoon. So, you know, you're taking a 50% chance that it's either Monsoon, one copy of the gene for Monsoon, or it's a normal. So now you're risking your money on this one. You don't know 100% of the time if it's a normal or one copy of the Monsoon. And here's what you're gambling. You're gambling $150. Hey, that's not bad at all. And this one, as a matter of fact, this one's a male. I couldn't find a female on this one. And the females were selling for a lot more than this. And it really depends on, you know, what you're looking for in the availability. I'd say with the Monsoon project, you know, there's so few of them out there. You can almost ask any price and people would pay it because there's not a lot of them out there at this stage in the game. And then once people start producing a whole bunch of them, then you have a lot of other people to compete with, and then the prices come down quite a bit. But keep in mind with recessive projects, they really hold their value over the long term because, you know, you really have to, it's kind of a gamble working all the Hets and then breeding them back to get the visuals. It's completely different than just breeding like a co-dominant gene through your whole collection and producing a whole bunch of visuals in one go. And that can really tank the price on a lot of the co-dominant morphs. But, you know, with the recessives, it takes years and years, especially working other genes into some of these recessives. So here's another one you may not be familiar with. This is the rainbow. The rainbow is, I'd say it's almost like another version of albino. It's pretty rare. There's not a whole lot of rainbows out there. As a matter of fact, there's no real rainbow females that I could find without any other genes. The closest I could come was this rainbow disco. And if you look at the price on this one is $4,000. Not quite as expensive as the Monsoon. But if you're thinking about getting into the rainbow project, you can buy a Het. Take a look at this one. This is a Het Rainbow. This also has disco in the mix. And if you're thinking about getting into a Het, this is what it's going to cost you. $500 for a Het. Now we're getting kind of reasonable. It's almost worth the, you know, the money at 500 bucks just to buy the Het. So you know 100% of the time you actually have that gene in the mix. It's not such a big difference between, you know, the possible Hets and the Hets in a lot of these combinations. But here you can actually get a possible Het. So take a look at this one. This is a Super Enchi Het Ghost, 66% Het Rainbow. So this one you're kind of gambling on. This is, I'd say this is kind of an exception because you get a lot of the other genes in there. It's not, you're not going to end up with a normal ball python for the money. But take a look at the price on this one. This one is only $150, so not too bad. Jumping into the Rainbow project, getting the Hets or the, you know, the possible Hets. So here's another project, a little bit lower. This is the Monarch. The Monarch is a pretty awesome morph. I'd say probably the closest thing to the Monarch is the Ultramel. They look really close, although you know, in a lot of cases what I've seen in the Monarch, the background ends up being a lot darker. Sometimes almost like a burgundy black kind of a color is a background. It's really awesome. So recessive, all these are recessives. You need 2 copies of the gene for a visual. And a Monarch, if you're thinking about getting a Monarch, this is what it's going to cost you, $3,500 for a male Monarch. And kind of the cool thing about buying a male too is you can breed it to other things and produce Hets. So you can kind of up your game on a lot of these projects. It depends really what you're shooting for. You can get the females and kind of sit on them for a couple of years, or if you have the money, you could buy a male and a female visual, breed the male and get a bunch of Hets, sell the Hets and get your money back on a lot of these projects. And then, you know, once your female matures, you can produce some visuals, which would be a really good long-term investment, I guess you would say. So this is a male, and here is what happens if you breed a male to something else and get a Het. This is a Het Monarch, completely normal looking, 100% Het Monarch. And if you're thinking about buying a Het, this is what it's going to cost you for a female, $900 for a Het Monarch. Pretty crazy. Still pretty high priced for the Hets. It'd almost be worth buying the visual male Het Monarch and producing a bunch of these. You could pay for it probably in your first season, which would be pretty awesome. And here's another one. If you want to take a chance on getting into the Monarch project, you could get a 66% Het Monarch, 66% chance that it has 1 copy of the Monarch gene. And this is what it's going to cost you, $450. So remember, this is $450 plus another $50 shipping. So this is a $500 snake, 34% chance that this is a $400 normal that you're buying. You know, it gets kind of crazy gambling on some of these projects. If you're buying, especially if you're buying the possible Hets, it's pretty crazy. So here's another project I've considered getting into. As a matter of fact, when I first got into ball pythons, I was considering either the Pied or the Tristripe. The Pieds are really hot. A lot of people are really into them, but the cool thing about the Tristripe is it's kind of a niche market. Not a lot of people have really gotten into the Tristripe, and there hasn't been a whole lot produced. So, you know, it's kind of the whole supply and demand thing. With not a lot of them produced, the demand still is pretty high enough to really bring the prices up pretty high for the Tristripe. And if you're thinking about buying a visual Tristripe, this is a female. This one is $2,500 for a pastel Tristripe, born last year. Pretty crazy. So if you're thinking about getting a Het, you breed the Tristripe to something else. 100% Het. This is a pastel, 100% Het Tristripe. This is probably the best way to get into anything. Is, you know, you're guaranteed, you know, you have 1 copy of the Tristripe gene. You're not gambling on a $400 normal snake. This is probably the best way, but you're still gonna have to pay. This one is $400, not too bad, jumping into 1 copy of the Tristripe. You can actually gamble on it if you want. You can get a 66% possible Het Tristripe. The price on this one, you're paying $75. I mean, in this one, you can gamble, and gamble. You can buy like 10 of these, and it's gonna cost you $750. I guarantee you, if you bought 10 female Tristripes, tri-stripes, and then later on you bought like a visual male or something, you could really have a really good return on investment, because, you know, at least probably 3/4 of those would have one copy of the tri-stripe jeans. So it's kind of amazing. You know, instead of buying a normal, you can almost buy a possible Het tri-stripe. This is probably one of the ones I would just kind of randomly add to my collection if I found something like this. This is a pretty awesome deal. So here is another one, kind of the last one I wanted to show you. This is the puzzle, and it's been another project that I've really had my eye on for a long time. As a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I was looking at a lot of these snakes and a lot of people's, you know, enclosures in the displays in the reptile shows. I was like, that looks like a really expensive normal ball python, and it kind of has this weird streak right down the side of it, and you don't realize the potential of the puzzle when you work it in with other genes. It can make some really amazing combinations, and puzzles have been really keeping their price for pretty much the last 5 years since I've gotten into ball pythons. And here, if you're thinking about buying a female visual puzzle, it is $1,750, a lot less than the other ones, but I'd say this is probably a really good place to start with the Hets, you know, kind of on the low end if you're thinking about investing in kind of, you know, the 100% Hets for a puzzle. As a matter of fact, I jumped over here. This is a Het puzzle. Looks like a completely normal ball python, 100% Het. And you're gonna pay $550 for a Het puzzle. Pretty expensive for one copy of a gene. It's really holding its price really good just for the Hets. And you can also gamble on it. Jump over here to the 66% Het. You know, there's different percentages too. So for example, you could have a 50% Het. If you take 100% Het, you breed it to something else, all the offspring would have a 50% chance of having one copy of the gene. Or if, as a matter of fact, if you took this, didn't prove it out, and you bred it to something else, you could get possible Hets, because you don't know if this one is a Het, you don't know if the offspring are a Het, and those are really inexpensive a lot of times, the possible Hets. So I kind of wanted to go with the 66% Het. At least you have, you know, a 66% chance on all these that you'll actually hit something. I probably wouldn't go with anything like a possible Het for any of these, because your chances are kind of slim. If you do go with a possible Het, I probably wouldn't pay more than a couple hundred, maybe a few $100s on any possible Het, because essentially what you're doing is you're taking a possible, you know, a statistic like this one, a 66%, and you're breeding it to something else, and your odds get really slim after that. So for this one, the price on this one, $225 plus another $50 for shipping. That's almost a $300 normal if you don't hit the Het puzzle. But if you bought multiple of these, you could probably, you know, you'd probably be a good deal, maybe a little bit better than buying a 100% Het. I don't know, on this one, I would probably buy 100% Het on any of them. Then, you know, 100% of the time, you're not wasting your money and buying a $400 normal. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And JJ King asks, what would you get if you bred a blue-eyed leucistic to an albino? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, if you could breed albino into a blue-eyed leucistic, essentially what you'd end up with is you'd end up with an all-white snake with red eyes. I don't know what Bobby's doing on my head. What are you doing, crazy, crazy snake? I think he just wants to go on my head for whatever reason. Oh, this crazy snake. Anyway, what was I saying? So if you're breeding a blue-eyed leucistic and an albino together, you can end up with an all-white snake with red eyes, but it's a little bit more complicated, because essentially the blue-eyed leucistic, there's a lot of different ways to make a blue-eyed leucistic. You can breed anything together in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. You can breed together Mojave or Lesser, Bamboo, Russo, Mystic, Special, Mocha, all those in the blue-eyed leucistic, and end up with an all-white snake. And the problem is, if you bred it to an albino, you really don't know what's in the blue-eyed leucistic. So you could end up with some Lessers, Het albino, Mojaves, Het albino, anything that is in that blue-eyed leucistic. And unless you really know what's in it, you get a kind of a variety. You'd get, as a matter of fact, everything is allelic. So if you bred like a Bamboo, like Bobby around my neck here, to a Lesser, I actually have a Lesser Bamboo blue-eyed leucistic. And if I bred that to something, half the offspring would come out Bamboo, half would come out as Lesser. And if you bred it to an albino, they would all be 100% het albinos. Then you have to breed the hets back together to actually get an all-white snake with red eyes, which would be a really amazing combination. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.